in the shiur. Thank you. And what we are in our third shiur, which is we're relating to the fundamentals of belief, ikarei ha'emunah, as we call them, and what we have seen in the last two shiurim is that it's when you talk about faith, when you talk about trust, when you talk about belief, from the very beginning of the first shiur, I said it's a bit difficult because you don't want to only rationalize, because the question is, what do you feel in your heart? Do you feel belief is not something that you can really convince in a sense, because it's deeper than that, even though some people take the path of scientific proof, and we spoke about that as well. In other words, each one has their different way of coming to belief and faith in Hashem. And we saw last week, we saw the different examples that the Midrashim give about Avraham himself. How does a child reach belief if they were not educated in belief? And we also saw different elements of the fundamentals of belief. What I would, following those two shiurim, which we talked more about, the how does one connect oneself to one belief, I do want this shiur to get down a bit more down to earth. In other words, what are the fundamentals of belief? And I do want to say that I was surprised, I am surprised sometimes when I hear statements, well, we Jews do not believe in that. And some of them are actually relating to fundamentals of belief that are specifically written that we say every single day in the shiur, in the siddur. So it's good to know that those exist. It's good to know where they are, where you can find them in the siddur. And of course, these are things that you have to develop for yourself and to learn, I would say, each one in depth. Once you have an idea of what the principles of belief are, then I would say it's an infinite lifelong journey to understand each one of these fundamentals. It is for me as well. The deeper you go, what we're talking about at the end of the day, essence of belief has to do with belief, I would say, in the soul. The fact that it's not just our body that exists, the fact that we have a soul, the fact that our soul is part of Hashem, the belief of Hashem is one. So once you have that as a basis, then you realize that you're going to explore the rest of your life with this to reach a sense of meaning, to reach a sense of understanding, and to peel and go deeper into the layers of belief of Emunah. So what I would like to, again, I think that the books that we have suggested also have both the book which is called the Chokhmah, the book of the sages, and the book of philosophy have many of the fundamentals of belief in their different chapters. For example, we're going to shortly talk about the Mashiach today, the coming of the Messiah, but that we can talk about for many, many hours. So I hope that you look into it more in depth in the sources of the books themselves. And we have both the book of the philosophy of Machshava and we have the book of Chokhmah. If you have not purchased the book, I've sent the PDF for those who have received the emails. So I would suggest that you take a chance once we've seen the fundamentals today, the 13 principles of belief, then you break them down for yourself and go into each and every one of them. And many of them will raise questions, I think, of things that we weren't aware of. Specifically, when we talk about the world to come, Olam Haba, which we'll mention also shortly today. When we talk about the Mashiach, there's a lot of, I think, confusion because we live in, even if we live in secular countries, still the basic, all of these countries came out of Christianity, and we have a lot of confusion in terms of what is the Messiah, the idea of the Messiah. The idea, I think, of reward and punishment as well is something that we don't talk about a lot. So these fundamentals are something that you can continue to develop. But I do want to look at it and see it in the list, the actual list of the 13 principles, which we will soon see. But in order to begin, let me see if I manage, because I opened different sources here. Um, yes. So if we continue from the fundamentals, the foundations of faith in God. So what we saw in the last shiurim, we saw that you can, even the amount of the principles, how many there are, could be split up into 1, into 6, into 13. But let's look at the longer list, because the shorter lists are basically expounded by the Rambam, by Maimonides, into 13. So we have make sure that we know each of the details. And these 13 are split up into 3 categories, as we saw. But let's just have a look at them, and then we'll see a simple list in the form of anima. I mean, I believe that, which you can find at the end of Shacharit in your Sidurim. So let us have a look. There are 13. So if we're going to look here, if you see here on page, in the Machshava, in the book of philosophy, on page 128, and you will see that they're split into 3 categories here. The Rambam himself, you can split into 3 categories. One is the foundations of faith in God. The second is the foundations of God connection with humankind. And the third is the foundations of reward and punishment. Within that, the entire messianic area, and we're gonna, Aaron will figure out soon why it is put there. And you're welcome to intervene or to unmute yourself or to chat if anything is unclear. So there are 13 principles or foundations of our religion. The existence of the Creator, namely a being who is perfect in all ways. He is the cause of the existence of all creatures. Their reality is dependent upon Him and derives from Him. In other words, that Hashem is the source. The first word of the Torah is Bereshit, right? Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. The very beginning of our understanding, or even beginning of the foundation of our religion, is the fact that, first of all, there is a creator. And we saw the 4 different ways that that the Midrash talks about Avraham figuring that out, whether it's natural, something coming from within, whether it's a rational understanding, whether it's a negativity, saying everything else doesn't exist, when he looked at the sun and the moon, for example. But the basic understanding that there is a creator, and the fact that there is a creator, everything goes back to him. So everything that I see is a creation of him. Everything, it's like walking to a museum in a sense, that you realize, oh, well, this is the artist. So everything that you see in life, everything, when one can say that everything that we as humans can do is we can create something. We cannot create, we can develop something out of matter that already exists. We cannot create matter. That's the difference between a creator and someone who develops something. We can formulate something, we can develop something, but we cannot create something out of nothing. With all of the developments of science as we see them today, there's one thing that no scientist can actually do or even explain: the fact that how did that first part of matter become? In other words, whatever name you want to call it, from the Big Bang Theory, which is a bit old, to further developments which are a bit more complex, whatever you want to go into, at the end of the day, there's something called infinite and something called finite. And everything that we see in this world is finite. And the infinite, it's like the difference between a number that exists and what was there before the number, right? Even the number 1 is creating a sense of something that we are calling something. We're calling it a number. Whereas the infinite is something which is non-relatable. It doesn't even relate to that one. We can call it oneness, but even that oneness is beyond, because we put it into our own sense of understanding, which is finite. So the creator is the infinite, who is perfect, who exists, who is the sense of all reality beyond what we see, beyond everything else, beyond time, beyond space. that is the place of the creator. And of course, even naming the Rambam says a being, but even that in a sense is difficult. That's why we leave it as Hashem. It's something which is a bit more vague that we do not put into, we can call it Hashem something, but we can call him God. But even calling him God in itself is putting it into finiteness. Second, which is connected to this, is the oneness of God, meaning that he who is the cause of everything is one. And we spoke just about that oneness. In other words, that all goes back to him. And in the sense of completion, of completeness, everything goes back to that oneness. We live in a world which is very far from that oneness. And many times we feel that brokenness, that we are not connected to the oneness. All of politics as they are today, taking us right and left to the extremes, in the sense that you're losing a sense of the oneness that really connects everything. When we talk about oneness, one of Hashem's many names is Shalom. We use the word Shalom as peace, but Shalom is actually oneness, in that you can bring two opposites together. It says about man and wife, when they are living together with Shalom, then Hashem is between them. The Shekhinah, Hashem's divine presence is within them, because you have two opposites coming together. That is the sense of the oneness of God. Therefore, the miracle of a child can come out of that oneness. That creation, in that sense, Hashem is there, the creator, within that oneness of Shalom between the man and wife. So this is a sense of oneness that we strive for in our basic, when we look for peace in life, when we look for, just a sense of being in a place in which we are happy. So it goes back to the oneness of God. Number 3, his incorporeity. He is not a material body nor a physical force. One of the challenges that we have is that even in the Torah, it talks about Hashem in the sense of a body. In other words, that there are terms used in the Torah that give Hashem a hand, can talk about Hashem being angry. All of this is in order for us to have be able to relate to Hashem. But everything that we relate to Hashem, the danger of that, and you see it throughout all of the history of mankind, especially in ancient times, that the easiest thing for man was to say, this is my God, and to put a shape to it, be it the sun, be it idols. It's something which is very natural that we try to do in order to say, this is the ultimate power, but we give up a face or a body or shape to it. And one of the, I would say the uniqueness of monotheism, in the sense of what Abraham brought into the picture, was that there is no picture, as it states directly in the 10 Commandments. Hashem says, in one sense, I'm a part of you. Your neshama, the soul that I have given you, is a part of me, but that is in a spiritual sense. But we are warned and forewarned many, many times in the Torah and in the Tanakh and by the prophets to be very careful of not creating any sense of shape or form. In this sense, I can even relate to this I was in the airport, as I am many times, on Thursday, and I was in the Istanbul airport, and they had a prayer room. So they basically had two options. They had one which was, they had a Magen David and a cross. So you can choose between the Magen David and the cross if you want to pray in that room, or the other one is to pray in a mosque. So actually, in a sense, it's easier to pray, or according to our belief, since the Muslims believe, the Muslim faith also has a sense of the belief in this oneness of Hashem, and that you don't have anything physical. So therefore, it would be no issue to pray in a mosque. I don't know how the others in the Istanbul airport would receive me if I stepped into the mosque there, but that's a separate question. But I wanted to see what it looked like in the so-called Jewish Christian prayer room. And I walked in, and they had a cross on one side of the room, and they had a Magen David on the other side of the room. So it's in other words, whoever's creating the airport thinks that I am praying to the Magen David, because I have to be praying to something, right? And that's why we don't have that when we walk into a synagogue. We have no sense of shape or form of anything. I would say over time, during the years that we spent in Europe, there was a change in the fact that there's a bit of a, in the fact that we want to make the synagogue a beautiful place, and we want to feel that Hashem is beautiful for us, but that when, God forbid, not creating a sense and form. So there is in synagogues today, you can have a Torah scroll which has lions on it, which has different shapes and forms, but it has to be very clear that that is not in any sense giving any form, again, chas v'shalom, God forbid, to God. Rather, it's a sense of we want to beautify the Torah, because we feel so close, we feel so special that God has given us the Torah. But I would say it's a change because not developed over time, that you have that distinction, whereas in the Torah it's very clear that no shape and form is accepted whatsoever. There are even some till this day that are careful not to take pictures or be in a picture. There were rabbis who were very careful that a picture not be taken of them, because the whole sense of having any shape or form is problematic. But today, in the world that we live in, we can make this distinction between the oneness of God and Him not having any sense of physicality, to the fact that we have a relation, we want ourselves to be relatable to Him, and therefore the Torah itself uses forms of Hashem's hand, Hashem being angry, different forms that are used, Hashem covering Moshe, in a sense as if it's Hashem does have a body. If anyone has any questions, just it's not. I hope that it's coming across clear. Let us. If there's any question, just stop me and unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to continue.
Can I ask you a question, David? Moises?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Yes.
It's because you just said something, and that's quite interesting. You said that sometimes the Torah uses kind of embodiment of God, and you said angriness. So, because I've sometimes struggled a little bit with this notion of God and the almost personification there is in the Torah sometimes. Can you explain a little bit more about how I should read that? Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you. I think it's very, there is sort of a paradox here, because if we leave Hashem the infinite that He is, then it will be something which is very, very distant from us, that is just there. In other words, the first element of the foundation of belief is much easier, perhaps, and that Hashem is the creator. Okay, I can walk the world and believe that Hashem creates. But how does Hashem relate to me? And I say a paradox because we live our life within, the understanding that, or the senses that we use, and that's how we relate to everything. So how do we then relate to the infinite in the relation that Hashem wants us to have to Him? When Hashem says, you shall love me, for example, like we say in the Shema. So how can we love Hashem if He's just a creator that has created? So Hashem says, I care for you, and I allow you, in a sense, to even say the word Baruch Atah Hashem, as we say so many times. How can we say, blessed are you, Hashem, when Hashem is infinite? How can we even put that form of you? So within that understanding, Hashem in the Torah also comes forward and uses the word anger in a sense of how can we relate to it. We saw it in this last week's parasha very strongly, in which we had this last week's reading spoke about what will happen to us if we do not follow the Torah. And there are terms that are used that we could find very disturbing even. In other words, Hashem says, I will take my revenge upon you, for example, right? And what does that mean? It's all we know that at the end of the day, Hashem is all merciful. We know at the end of the day that Hashem is creating a path for us as a people to be able to manage and to live our lives in the right way, and to live our lives as a people connected to the land. That's the essence, right? Connected to the Holy Land, and that is a different level because it's different than everything else. I would say that believing in the soul and believing in the Torah and believing in mitzvot and believing in reward and punishment and relation to God is very, very far from what we are educated as natural in the world that we live in today. So therefore, in order to make it relatable and say this is what exists, we have to have some way to attach to it emotionally. And therefore, it's not only our sages who do so, but Hashem does so himself. The wording that Chazal used for this, it says, Dibra Torah bilshon bnei Adam, that the Torah speaks in the language of people, in other words, in a relatability, which is an amazing thing, because it's as if Hashem is putting him down or limiting himself in a fashion in which we can, just so that we can understand. It's like if you take a baby, for example, and you want the baby to understand, so you're going to start gurgle sounds that sound maybe a bit stupid to someone else, but you're limiting yourself or taking them one step at a time so that they can understand, so that you're leading them in the path. So anything or any emotion that is used is something in order for us to be able to relate to it, but it's extremely important that we ourselves all the time keep in mind that this is just for us, that the deeper we understand, the deeper we reach in our understanding of the soul of our connection to Hashem, then maybe actually we can reach a higher level of connection that doesn't require this, I called it once in one of our shiurim, the old man with a stick. In other words, we have this sense that we keep Hashem, in first grade. And if we develop ourselves, both spiritually and philosophically, then we should do so as well in our relation to Hashem. I hope that was helpful. Great. So let us try to, thank you very much. It's very helpful when there's input. So let us look at number 4. We're still in the first beginning, and we can go through this for a long time, but I'm just trying to get a sense of the total picture. So eternity, he is eternal, and nothing besides him is eternal as he is. Again, there's no relation will be, after everything else. We live in a specific world. We know that the world we live in is finite. At some point it was began, and at some point there's an end, but Hashem is beyond that Hashem is eternal. Nothing besides him is eternal as he is. Everything else is finite. Note that the great foundation in the Torah of Moses, our teacher, is that the world is created. And in other words, going back to the sense of creation. So the final, I just want to manage to get through all of them and also see them written in the form that they are written. So I'm going to go forward. God is the one whom it is fitting to serve and extol, to proclaim his greatness and perform his mitzvot. And one should not do these for anything whose existence is inferior to his. It's basically a commandment of life. It's how you wake up in the morning. It's the path that you take. It's everything that you do in your life, every single thing. It's not, well, do I keep Shabbat? Being a believing person changes every essence of who you are, because believing, as we said, is not only that there is a creator, It's how, and the mitzvot are there in order to guide us along the path of what action should be taken in order for us to be naturally connected to Hashem. So the mitzvot, again, as we've mentioned quite a few times, it's not only a commandment, it's how to connect ourselves. And in that sense, it's either this is what it means for you or it's not. The mitzvot, when we say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, when we say Blessed are you Hashem, the Master of the world, who has given us His mitzvot. This is this belief. Otherwise, why do we do the mitzvot? Why do we keep Shabbat? Why are we gonna fast for almost 25 hours on Yom Kippur? Is it a social thing, or is it something that we actually believe in? And it's either or. In other words, either you believe that Hashem has given us the mitzvot, or you don't. It's black and white in that sense. Of course, within that is a complexity of how I relate to it, how I connect to it. But the fact that I do the mitzvot and I accept upon myself the mitzvot is through this belief that Hashem has given us the Torah and given us the mitzvot. Number 6. So now we're going to the second section here, called the foundations of God's connection with humankind. So number 6 is prophecy. In other words, what is prophecy? A prophet is a messenger of Hashem who is a high spiritual level in which he or she can channel down for Hashem the message that needs to be given over to humankind. So prophecy was a basic element that existed throughout our history as a Jewish people until the end of the temple. And there is a spiritual one, as one develops his levels of spirituality, one can reach a closer and closer sense to being completely within the oneness of Hashem, and in that way being able to hear Hashem speak to you. But the prophecy itself, in the sense that there is a messenger who's giving over, and Hashem came to the prophets in different ways, then as we will see in the next part, then in that sense, one should know that, here I'm going to read inside, one should know that in humankind, there are those with a nature composed of exceptionally pure and elevated character traits and great perfections. There were many who said that you're not born that way. It's something that you are able to reach that level of purity and put aside anything which is blocking that connection to Hashem. These are the prophets, and this is prophecy, and that is what it concerns. Moshe Rabbeinu, in other words, the prophet of all prophets. So he was able to do that in a way in which it says in the Torah itself that he was able to speak to Hashem, again using an embodiment, that he was able to speak to Hashem face to face. In other words, that Hashem came to other prophets through dreams, through giving them parables. For example, Ezekiel, in which he sees, he's in a vision, and he sees a dream of bones, for example, and then the bones come to life, and it's explaining the after days, so that's a dream or vision. Whereas Moshe was able to keep in the same himself, he didn't go into a sense of being into a vision or dream, but Moshe was able to give over Hashem's word for word, face to face. We must believe that he was the father of all prophets who came before him, as well as those who arose after him. Number 8, the Torah is from heaven. In other words, in this day and age, we have many who are still out there who try to go into different, to scientifically look at the Torah and see how it was written, at what period it was written, who composed the different parts. Our basic belief is that Torah is from heaven. We must believe that the entire Torah that we have today is the one given through Moses, the entirety of which came from the mouth of the Almighty. I will say, and it's something that you can look into in in depth is that on the one hand, we have the Aseret HaDibrot, we have the 10 Commandments that were given on Mount Sinai. And Am Yisrael themselves did not stand up to that level of receiving it, and they were scared, so Moshe had to give them over after the first part of it. And then it is a question, in other words, even raised in the Talmud, when the Torah was actually written, because did Moshe write the final passage in which he says that Moshe has died and that no one is as great as Moshe? When did he write that? So that was not given at Mount Sinai itself. It was written by Moshe towards his death. And we have Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moses that were given down. But all of this was given over to Moshe through Hashem, and it was written word by word. We believe that each word and each letter of the Torah is sacred, that if one letter of the Torah is erased, for example, the entire Torah is we can no longer read from it until it's fixed. This is our sacredness. And again, we have to be careful between the distinction that it is sacred, but in itself, that is something which is holy. The Torah itself is holy because it brings forward the infiniteness of God. But it's not an embodiment, God forbid, of God himself. The Torah of Moses will not be revised or replaced, and no other Torah will ever come from the Creator. This especially becomes important in relation to Christianity, in terms of the Testament, the Old Testament, the New Testament. The Torah was given to us, and the Torah are the 5 books of Moshe. We have the Tanakh, which is the additional parts of what Hashem has transferred through the prophets. So we have the Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the Torah, the prophets, and the scriptures, which is a compilation of the prophets. And we will not have another Torah. The Torah will not be changed or revised or replaced. This is our map, our DNA of how to live our lives. Again, if there's any questions, you're welcome to mute yourself before we go forward. I know this is a lot, but I hope that it is clear to everyone.
Can I ask another question? Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Okay, so I love this description of the Torah. How do you sometimes deal with, because there's a lot of punishment in Torah, like, and sometimes we sit in shul and, there's a paragraph and somebody's getting stoned, somebody's getting killed, there's a lot of this. So if the Torah is holy and everything is sacred in it, how do you deal with these kind of problematic human behaviors and views that are in the Torah?
Okay, so your question is basically an introduction, I think, to the final part here. I hope that it will relate to that, even though your question is a bit different, but maybe we can look at it. But before we look at the foundations of reward and punishment, there's a very big difference, I would say, between the punishment, reward and punishment, which is set by Hashem to human nature itself, and whether they are following Hashem's path. In other words, and I think we should make the difference. And also the fact that sometimes we have a tendency, and I hear it all the time, how could a religious person act this way? We were talking about tshuva so much in the other shiur. There's no one who is perfect, and we all have our human tendencies to act in a certain way. But the Torah says what is right and wrong. And it doesn't mean that every person who acts in a certain way is right. In other words, yes, you represent something, but life is a challenge, and we're striving to make ourselves better. So I'm going to make that distinction before we go forward. So the foundations of reward and punishment. God knows the deeds of human beings as does not ignore them. In other words, there's a big difference here between this and the fact that in our last shiur on Wednesday with Rav Michael Melchior, he was talking about the free will, that we have full free will, and that Hashem does not intervene in what we do. But there's a difference between intervention and ignoring. at the end of the day, and this is why this is all connected together, because the world that we live in is a temporary world. We live in a world which is a corridor between the world that we came from, in other words, a world of souls, and the world that we will go to, which will come to soon. And in that sense, we are supposed to be late, and our actions and the mitzvot that we do are all connected to Hashem. The fact that we have free will doesn't mean that one can be evil and Hashem does not see it. So Hashem watches over, Hashem sees us, Hashem sees what we're doing, and Hashem gives us the space in order to have that free will. How is Hashem as a knowing of all, on the other hand, allowing something to happen? These are philosophical questions that we saw last week. The Rambam himself says there's not enough ink in the world to fill enough pages to discuss these philosophical issues. But I think here it's more relevant to say, how do I feel as a human being? And at the end of the day, I must know that the actions that I take are seen by Hashem and are watched by Hashem and have implications both on my life here and the world to come as well. So, I'm going to go forward. We have a question in the chat, but in Hebrew, I hope I will have time, but I just want to make sure we get through all of this. So number 11, God rewards a person who fulfills the mitzvot of the Torah, and he punishes whoever violates the Torah's prohibition. There's different levels of reward and punishment. At the end of the day, the greatest world is the world to come. The harshest punishment is excision, in other words, denial from the world to come. Why is it, again, going back to the old man with the stick? If we are a bit childish in our relation to Hashem, then we might see, okay, well, did I do this and what do I get for it? And then how do I live my life and am I going to be rewarded for it? The idea of also the world to come and the idea of heaven and hell, we have many, many sources, and some of them are in the book of the sages and the book of philosophy on the part of them on the Mashiach and the world to come. And again, I suggest that you look at it because I don't think we're going to have time to go through it today. But as you see, many of our sources are trying to take this apart and say, what is reward at the end of the day? We have a neshama, we have a soul inside of us, and the soul is infinite. The outcome, it's more, the better than to say the word reward and punishment would be, as the Rambam says here, the outcome of our actions. The world here is a world of challenge, but a world of a path in which we have an opportunity to live up to the challenge of the world and live our life in a righteous and just way. We saw in one of the sources that one of the prophets says that is the basis, to live your life in a righteous and just way. So if we live in that way, then we are allowing our soul to remain in its natural sense of where it should be. And when it goes onwards, which is the whole idea, which is also an essence of belief, is that since we believe in the soul, if one does not believe in the soul, does not believe in the infinite, does not believe in a relation to Hashem, then it changes every way you live. Because if you only live once, as some people say, you only live the life, then why should I be an ethical or moral person? In order to, for the overall good of humankind, for myself, at the end, it all comes back to why should I do that? Because I'm not going to be here after 80, 90, or 100 years. Whereas if you live in the sense of understanding that everything that you do is connected to where you will be afterwards, because our soul goes back to its natural sense and back to being connected to the infinite, then that is the sense of the world to come, in which everything is back as it's supposed to be. The spiritual becomes one, and your soul goes back to that oneness of Hashem. Actions that you have taken in your life, which have taken you which away from that, be it bodily pleasure that was not connected to God, be it acting unjustly to people, being, any action which actually blemishes your soul, in that soul cannot go back to its natural place. and therefore it has to go through a process of fixing or of cleansing, which we can call Gehenom, which is called hell. Again, the sense of the fire of hell, and 3,000 degrees in hell are different things. They're just a way that some people put it in other, because there's nothing bodily about the world to come. So the world to come is a place in which our soul goes back to where it was, goes back to the infinite one. And if it is the harshest punishment, is when it is not allowed to do so. One a sage once, one wise person once described the world to come as you can have two people sitting in the same place, and one thinks it's the world to come because he has developed a sense of Torah and of mitzvot, and therefore he's sitting there. And for the other one, it's the greatest hell because he cannot even understand what's going on, and he's just frustrated sitting there. So maybe that is a sense as well. If we've refined and our soul through the process in our world. And one more thing I would say about this is that it says that the souls in heaven are jealous of us because we have the choice to choose good, whereas they are like robots in which they can't make any choices. So they live in the perfect world, but that perfect world is a bit robotic in the sense that no change can be made. Whereas we can change, we can fix, we can do something wrong and then fix it. We can develop, we can step up, on our own spiritual level. These are all things that are not possible in the world to come. And again, I've heard many people actually in Sweden say to me, we don't believe in the world to come. So yes, we do, but maybe it's in a different sense than the surroundings. And this brings us to the Messianic era. This is a lot of confusion regarding the Messiah and what is the Messiah and the coming and the second coming and all of it. What is the Messianic era? The Messianic era, again, as it's put forward in the sources that I would like you, I hope that you will have a chance to read in the book of Mashiach. I wrote down the pages. If you look at some of the sources on Mashiach, if I skip here 1 second forward, I'm going to just skip just so that you see. There's a section here called Mashiach, and you're welcome to read some of the sources on this, which will give you, I think, a deeper understanding of what I'm trying to give in a very short version here, such as the purpose of creation, living in this world, what is the world to be. But basically, the Mashiach is something that the belief in the Mashiach is that there will come a time in this world in which the world will go back to the perfect sense as it was when before mankind started messing up the world, so to say. And the Mashiach is both a period and a person. The Mashiach is the king. We have the potential of it says that every generation has a Mashiach, someone who has a potential to be the Mashiach who is born. And it is up to us whether we do what is necessary to bring about the world of completion, to bring about this world. And again, either we bring it about ourselves, or if it's necessary for Hashem to do so, then it will come through. If we're not there ourselves, then it will be forceful to bring the world to that place. But again, I'm just throwing out some ideas that you can look into as well. So these two, the world to come and the Messianic era, are connected to each other. And right, I'm just looking to go back. Here we are. Believing and trusting that the anointed one will come. The word Mashiach means the anointed. So originally, David HaMelech, King David, was anointed. Mashiach, he was anointed by Samuel, by the prophet, to be the king. So the anointed one is the one who can bring about the world to come back to its place of soul. But very, very shortly, I will just go into this and say that many have ideas that the whole world will change. And if we look at Maimonides amongst others, they say, no, the world will continue just as it is now. However, our focus in the world will be as it should be. Because if we're really to live in a world which acknowledges the soul that exists, which acknowledges the infiniteness of God, we would live in a different way. We would live in a manner of justice to one another because God is looking over us. We would all strive to create a better world for one another. So the fact that we are not doing so will be brought about that change will be when the Mashiach comes. But we'll continue to get on the bus or on the train, or maybe the Mashiach will have a better ecological solution. I mean, the perfect world. But that perfect world means it's not it's not that sense that sometimes we have of heaven. Rather, this world will become heaven, one can say. And in that world as well, all the souls will come back to be. This is a very difficult thing to try to fathom. It's very, what does it mean, the revival of the dead? Because then we get into these zombie movies and thinking the dead are coming out of the graves. But rather, the souls are coming back into this complete world in a sense that everything is coming back into completion. But all of this, again, is something that it's very important to know that these are fundamentals of our belief. And then within that, I think it's something that one can develop each and every one of these 13 foundations of belief and look into them in depth. Again, within even the book that I'm reading from now, there's two sections, one on Mashiach and one on the world to come. If you look at some of the sources here, just to read, I'm going to read the beginning of these two sections and then leave the reading to you. So just to read the part of the Mashiach, one of the foundations of Judaism is belief in the ultimate coming of the Messiah. He will bring about the redemption not only of the Jewish people, but of the entire world, and we await his arrival every day. In other words, we don't know the calculations in heaven. We don't know where the world actually is right now. So in that sense, we must wait every day because maybe the action that we are taking now will bring about the completion in the world that is missing right now. We should wake up every day expecting and hoping that the Mashiach will come. There's stories of rabbis who used to live, with a suitcase packed next to their bed because maybe the Mashiach will come and they have to be on the move. So the Messiah will be wiser than King Solomon, will be a great prophet whose level of prophecy will approach that of Moses. He will rebuild the temple, gather in the Jewish people to the land of Israel, reestablish the Torah as the guiding constitution of the community. One who does not believe in the coming of Mashiach is considered a heretic who rejects the Torah as well as Moses' authority. There's many questions that we can ask. In other words, where do we stand today? Is the fact that we are back in the land of Israel something which has brought us closer to this sense of redemption? Many questions that we're going to leave open because I just want to see the description that we're talking about. In every generation, there's a saintly person who is worthy of redeeming the Jewish people. We do not know who he is, and he does not know that he is to be the Redeemer. In other words, some of the description is that he's sitting as a poor person on the streets of Rome, and he's approached because someone has realized that he is the Mashiach. When the time for redemption arrives, God will appear to him just as he appeared to Moses at the burning bush. In the Messianic era, the laws of nature will not change. The physical properties of the world will be spiritually elevated. In other words, it's putting the focus on the infinite. The soul will reach its proper place. In other words, we live in a backwards world in which what is considered physical is what is real, and the soul is considered maybe something that one may believe in. Whereas the essence of life, as we know, is the soul itself, is the spiritual, because when we don't have that, we die. The physical is meaningless without that. So the world would change around so that the spiritual will be back to its elevated place where it should be. The entire world will be immeasurably good and will be filled with the understanding of Hashem. So imagine if you walk down the street and you can say, oh, my prayer this morning wasn't so good, but just to discuss spirituality, to realize that Hashem's existence, something natural that one can live. Those things that were already good during the exile will not cease to exist, but they will emerge from their pre-Messianic state, and their true inner essence will be revealed. So there are a couple of questions here that I do want to deal with, but as I told you, I would like to show you at least that these principles or fundamentals of faith are quite clear in the Siddur themselves. Um, if we open the Siddur at the beginning of the Siddur, I'll show you how I came to this. If you have a Siddur, you're welcome to open. But here in Sefaria, if I open the Ashkenazi Siddur and look at the beginning of Shacharit, so there's something called preparatory prayers. Some of these were actually sometimes said at the end of the prayer, but now that they're at the beginning of the prayer. So one second. Here, so we have a poem that was written in Italy, apparently in the 13th century, which puts all of these, it's called the Yigdal, and it's a song that puts together all of the all of the 13 fundamental principles that we spoke about into one beautiful song. There's different melodies for this, and then we're going to see the Ani Ma'amin as well. So there's, I was looking up different melodies of Yigdal Elohim Chai, which is many times sang on Shabbat after the evening prayer. And I just looked in the National Library of Israel, who have a collection of, they collect, different compositions from the different communities, Jewish communities throughout the period. And if you look here, you'll see there's no less than 83 different tunes sung from the Yemenites to North Africans, to Turkey, to Bulgaria, to modern Israel, to India, to Ashkenaz. So basically this was spread throughout the entire Jewish world, and people composed different tunes to it. If you're musical, you're very welcome to look up and listen to 83 different tunes of this melody, which puts together what is it, our essence of belief, and it's done in a beautiful fashion. So I can just share one of these, for example. Here you go. Let's see. No, it's not working. We're not going to waste time, but you can look it up. So this is the second poem that we have that puts together all of the different fundamentals of belief. Again, I'm going to go back to the Siddur. And if we look in the Siddur itself, in Ashkenazi Siddur, at the end of Shacharit, we can, what's called here post-service, we have the 13 principles. And the 13 principles, each of them begin with the word Ani Ma'amin, I believe. So it basically takes the 13 principles of Maimonides that we saw, and it's something that many say every single morning after the Shacharit, just to remind oneself of our belief. So if we look at these quickly, we will see that these are the 13 principles that we went through today. I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, his name be blessed, created and controls all creations, and he alone performs, and will perform all action. So basically, if we go down here, and you should open your Sidurim and go through them, you will see that all of these foundations of belief that we went through today, you will see that are written here. I would say that the most famous of them all is Ani Ma'amin ve'emunah shlema, I believe with perfect faith, b'viyat HaMashiach, in the coming of Mashiach, and ve'af al pi she'yitmameh im kol ze achake lo b'chol yom she'yavo. And though he may tarry, in other words, it may, right, we've been waiting for him, I will anticipate daily his coming. And this part or this principle became so important because it gives you strength to go beyond whatever difficulty you're going through. And especially with the persecution that we faced as a people. So just to know that what we see as evil with our eyes in the world that we see is just a corridor, and it's the world is messed up basically. But that we are the chosen people, we are the people of Hashem, and that we continue with belief to continue on. And there's a beautiful story. We don't have time to go into it now, but there's a beautiful story of how a tune, a melody for this was composed in the train on the way to Auschwitz, and a Hasidic person who was a composer for the Majitz Rebbe, one of the leaders of a Hasidic dynasty named Majitz. They were extremely musical, and he composed it, and he wrote down the notes in the train on the way to Auschwitz and said to someone, whoever takes this, who is willing to take this to my rabbi who had managed to escape in a miraculous way. So just to give, we can talk about this more. You can look up the story, but basically to realize the depth of emunah that one must have when you're in such a situation, to sit and to sing, and everyone in the train joined in singing. Imagine that scene. This train is on its way to where it is. You're seeing the most evil that mankind can reach, and you are beyond that because you have a deep belief in Hashem and in the coming of the Mashiach. So, what you see here is you see the 13 principles at the back of the shacharit, at the end of the shacharit, and we have that song at the beginning called Yigdal Elohim Chai V'Yishtabach, and you're welcome to look up on YouTube. You can find many melodies if you're interested, or look up on the site of the National. If you want to compare between the Yemenite one, the North African one, the Ashkenazi one, it's fascinating in itself to compare all of those. So we had well, I know we're 5 minutes into past our timeline, but we did have a couple of questions from Arad. Do you want to share in English? Do you want to share one of your questions, perhaps?
One second, I need to come to it. Okay, the first question was why we say that it's come from God, the Torah, when most of the Torah it's historic stories about what happened, and not some prophet words. And it's written by writer. It doesn't come from prophet, from Moshe and the others. So why we claim that everything that's written, it's written from God?
Okay, thank you, Arad. What we discuss, and it's a very good question, and we can go in depth, but our belief is that the Torah itself, when it is, whatever is written in the Torah, as we said, is written, Hashem is giving it over to Moshe to write it down. And I'm not talking about the later prophets, the Nevi'im and Ktubim, which were written by different people. But I think that the bigger question here is why. In other words, the Torah, if the Torah, and we discussed this before, if the Torah was only a Torah of telling us what to do, which sometimes people think, then the Torah should have not even started with the creation, should not have started with Bereshit. It sort of started when we became a people or started at Mount Sinai. The Torah and the stories that it gives over is a path, as the entire Torah is, how to be an ethical person, how to find my connection, how to be a part of a people. And the Torah, in that sense, every single word in the Torah is connecting us to that. There's nothing written in the Torah which is not relevant to us. It's up to us to find how it is relevant. That's why you have so many layers. That's why you have books of commentary written by, for example, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. Why is it relevant that he writes something how do we find it relevant? What do you mean? He just, why is a new commentary relevant? Because every time the Torah, as it is infinite, is something that we have to answer for ourselves. How is it relevant for me? And in that sense, the storytelling in the Torah is very important because stories allow us to feel that we can relate to them. If someone tells us do this and don't do that, it's less relatable. So that is a very limited part of the Torah in which Hashem is saying, do this, do that. Whereas the Torah, through its stories, is allowing us to the relatability. The I would say that another question that you wrote here in Hebrew, I hope I've touched upon, is that everything that we have seen today in terms of the fundamentals of belief all go back to one fundamental thing. That the fact that we believe in God and our relation to Him and how we live our lives. That's the basis of the fundamentals of what we live and how we should live. And all of the rest of it, in other words, of course, we should be good people because God created us in the essence of good. We all have the neshama, which is pure, which is inside of us. So if we're doing anything wrong, then we're actually going against that. And if we are, so we can put that all into that. And within that, I think the fact that we can understand and believe that the world is coming to a good place is hopeful. That we know that we're going to end up in a world of good, and that we know that the good will overcome. That we know that those good people out there, even though we might see it in a different way today, at the end of the day, that first of all, Hashem watches over us and sees our actions, but that the outcome of our action is important for the fixing of the world, to bring the world about to a place in which the world will be a better place. The world to come, where we changes our perspective of how we live our lives, as does the understanding that Mashiach can come every day, and suddenly everything will change, and that suddenly what we are doing and the way that we have been living our lives will be the model for many people of how to live their lives in the proper way. I'm sure that I haven't answered everything. I hope that I've raised for you more questions than answers today, because it wasn't simple to go through in 1 hour the 13 fundamentals of belief. But now that you know that you have a list of them in the Siddur, you can go through them, and then you can explore them further in the books that I hope you have purchased. And if you have not done so, then please do so, so that you can follow the shiur properly. And following the shiur specifically, I mentioned the pages, the section on Mashiach, which is page 145 in the book on philosophy and machshava, and the world to come, which is on page 165. So just to go through that again, we've been looking at page 128, which is in this section on the fundamentals of belief that I asked you to read. And then Mashiach you can look further into it on page 145, the world to come 165, and in the other book called Chokhmah, or the one from the sages, there's a section on page 391 on the coming of Mashiach, which has fascinating stories that will complement your discussion. Again, if you can, I would recommend that you find someone in the room here who's living where you are living, and maybe come together, once a week, once every couple of weeks, just to learn together. The platform for learning does not only have to be when one of us is teaching, but that you follow up both at home, and also I suggest that you come together, and that if possible also come to the seminar on October the 2nd. Final point here, it's a very good question. in terms of the date after the Chagim that will be continue, I have it here. 1 second. Just give me 1 second to find it. I will let you know right now when we will continue. Just give me 1 second. Yes, this shiur will continue on the 23rd of October. So the seminar is on the 2nd of October, and after the Chagim, we will continue. October 23rd, you can make a note, will be the next shiur following the Chagim and following the seminar. So October 23rd, we will have this week our final shiur on Emunah, on Tshuva on Wednesday, and you're welcome as well. So thank you, and for anyone who we don't see on Wednesday, I want to wish you all Shana Tova and Aktiva v'Chatima Tova. May you all be written in the book of life and goodness and health, you and your families. And may Rosh Hashanah be a day in which you really manage to connect to Hashem and find your way through the prayers and Yom Kippur as well. And just to focus on hopefully following these shiurim, that it's not only about reward and punishment, I have sinned or I have not, but rather where can I go? How can I actually find myself in a better place in which my life can change for the better, for myself, for those surrounding me, and for my connection with Hashem. So I wish you all the best and Shana Tova if we don't see each other on Wednesday. Shalom and Litoot.